Good afternoon, Gary. I'm Kristen and this is Stephanie, and we're here to help consult you with some bidding options for Creative Casuals. So first we'll go over your current situation at Creative Casuals to establish the capacity that you're currently operating with. We'll then go over the bid alternatives, which have been suggested by Creative Casuals to look into. This will tell us how much we should cost for each one, which will determine the pricing of the jobs. We'll then do a qualitative evaluation in order to determine which jobs you should go for. So currently Creative Casuals is an Ontario textile industry. Through quality, service and turnaround time, we are able to keep our demand relatively high. Having said that, we do only operate at 10% of our current capacity, and we can look for multiple jobs in order to increase some of this idle room. Two of the jobs that we have been considering are one from the RCMP, which would require 28,000 units of washable trousers to be produced by the end of December, and the other is from the Ministry, which would require roughly 120,000 units of pants and shorts that would be produced over a length of 2 years. The Ministry actually had 5 different options that you could choose from, but since we are most familiar with the materials used for the pants and the shorts, we figured we should just stick with these two.
Okay, so for the direct materials for job number 1, which is the washable trousers for the RCMP, we have the fabric and the zippers, Velcro and buttons. Using the numbers we were given, we calculated direct materials to be $145,000. So if we go to our job order cost sheet, this is for job number 1, so you'll see that the job is completed in December 31st, 2010. So we're hoping that it will begin hopefully by August, since it will require that time to be finished. This job requires 28,000 units to be produced. So if we plug our total direct materials into that job order cost sheet, then we can move on to direct labor. Direct labor is separated into 2 categories, the sewing and the packaging categories. These are the only 2 required for job number 1. So for the sewing category, we use the units and the numbers we were given to calculate $97,500 for sewing and $97,500 for packaging. You'll notice that they are the same numbers. This is because the packagers work at the same rate as the sewers. This gives us a total direct labor of $195,000, which we'll put into our job order cost sheet. If we move on to applied overhead, it takes 6,500 hours to complete job number 1. If we divide this by the total number of labor hours for all of the production for 5 months for job number 1, that gives us a 49.6% of applied overhead rate. So it's important to note that only 80% of the plant is dedicated towards production and 20% is dedicated towards office space. So we take our rent of $4,700 a month times our 5 months times our applied overhead rate of 49.6%, which will give us our rent for the month, the rent for the job to be allocated to overhead. We do the same for utilities and heating. For maintenance and repairs, we allocate the entire amount towards overhead. So we just take that amount and multiply it by our applied overhead rate of 49.6%. So this gives us a total manufacturing overhead of $12,300. So adding this to our direct labor and our direct materials, this will give us a total cost of job number 1 of $352,500.
So moving on to job 2 for the Ministry, we divided the direct materials based on the pants and the shorts. So for the pants, we're determined by the amount of material that's used at the cost of the material, giving us direct materials of $320,000. For the shorts, it uses roughly 80% of the material that pants do, which comes out to be around $250,000. When adding these 2 costs together, we get our total direct materials for job 2 to be $580,000, which we can then plug into our second job order cost sheet. For direct labor, we divided it based on the sewing and the packaging. We looked at the rate at which they could complete units, and with their wage rate of $15 an hour, we were able to come up with the direct labor costs for the total amount of units. Since shorts and pants take the same amount of time to make, the total direct labor costs equal 800,000 units, or $800,000 in total. When we look at our applied overhead, it's also based on labor hours, so we have to find out how many labor hours it takes to make the total 120,000 units of shorts and pants. We find this to be 27,000 hours, and when we divide that by the total amount of hours for the next 24 months, we get an overhead rate of 47%. This can be divided up evenly between the pants and shorts as they take the same amount of time to make. So when we find our rent, utilities, and manufacturing overhead expense for the next 24 months, we end up with a total manufacturing overhead of $126,000. The only important difference to note here is that under utilities and heating, there is a 30% increase with this second job. So when we take the total manufacturing overhead and split it up based on 23% for both the pants and then the shorts, we get allocated overhead of $29,000 under each, giving us total overhead of $58,000. In total, with the overhead, direct labor, and direct material, our job costs roughly $1.4 million.
Okay, so this table is from Statistics Canada. It's the textile and fabric finishing industry average for 2010. It gives us a 169% markup from cost of goods sold. So regardless of the industry average, Creative Casual's 2008 markup was 139%, and for 2009 they had a 143% markup. So in order to remain competitive, we wanted to do a markup below industry average, but still increase our markup by 4% from 2009, so that we have a fair compensation from this job. So with our 147% markup of our cost of goods sold, that gives us $518,000 for job number 1. For job number 2, we wanted to remain competitive as well, but since it's expensed over 2 years, we wanted to do an 8% markup from 2009. So that gives us a total of 150% markup of cost of goods sold. So this will give us a price of $2.2 million. So we did a brief evaluation of the 2 jobs. Job number 1 had a 0 payment default risk, added security from having a new customer in contracts, and used an additional 5.7% of production capacity. It was also a guaranteed contract. Job number 2 had an additional 5% production capacity usage. It has long-term potential for over 2 years, with possibly more, and an increased salary for you of $20,000. However, it does increase the time required at work, which takes away from family time, and there are increased costs for utilities as well.
So in our recommendations for you, Gary, we do suggest that you make a bid on job number 1. We do believe that the price that we have set out for you is competitive for the industry, as we do remain below the average, but it is still worth your time as we are doing that 4% increase from our last year's revenues. We also think that you should consider the pros and cons of job number 2 before submitting a bid for the ministry. This is because it will eat into your personal time, even though it would be compensated through an increase to your salary and an increase to revenues. One other thing, if you do decide to go with job number 2 as well, is that we suggest you go with the cargo pants and the shorts together, as going for more than one of the categories offered by the ministry will split your overhead costs up and give you a cost savings of $18,000 as opposed to just going for one of those categories. So in final conclusions, going for both of these jobs would help reduce that unused capacity that you currently have. It would also increase the security in holding multiple contracts with various customers. And also it would help to diminish the negative effects from the past financial toll that the Canadian textile industry has felt.